Gad, West Virginia. South of Summersville, off Route 19, near Gauley River, and just over the hill from Salmon Run, there was once a thriving community that was affectionately known as Gad. The community of Gad is now gone, but the many families that once called it home have certainly not forgotten that Gad once existed. Construction of the Summersville Dam in the early 1960s and the resulting reservoir forced all the residents of Gad to sell their property to the Corps of Engineers. All the families who lived in Gad had no choice but to sell off their property, and most just moved away. However, most, if not all of them, left a small piece of their heart and soul in Gad, West Virginia. Some say you can still see remnants of the old community when the water is drained from the lake for the winter pool. I know the old road to the community of Sparks is still very visible when the water level is lowered. And most of you have heard about the Corps of Engineers policy to name a dam after the nearest town. It is very clear that Summersville Dam should have been called Gad Dam. It was a final insult to a proud community. My good friend Willis Brown was born and raised in Gad, and he loaned me a couple of these old photographs of the Bachus Store, which was located there in Gad. We both suspect that the date of the photograph is somewhere in the early 1900s. Willis said he's been told that those tents that you see over on the knoll behind the store belong to a survey crew who are mapping out one of the first railroads to be built in this area, which was built alongside the Gauley River and went all the way to Curtin. Willis says that he does remember that during that time when he was growing up there in Gad, and that was during the 20s and 30s, that there were traveling groups of gypsies would often come to the community and they would set up their camps there on that very same knoll. This store that you see in this photograph set somewhere near where Long Point Marina is today. The store was very well stocked, and in its later life it became home to the Gad Post Office. A gentleman by the name of Arthur Bachus owned and operated both the store and the post office there for many years, and Mr. and Mrs. Bachus were parents to several children. I have a small photograph of Ruth Bachus standing in front of the store and behind the car that Mr. Bachus used to drive Ruth and her siblings to high school, and the high school was located way over in Summersville. I'm told that Mr. Bachus had actually bought this store from Henry Sims in the early 1920s, and the Bachus family continued to operate the store until its closing, sometime in the late 1950s. I don't really have a good idea who the builder of the original store was, but I do know in Gad's heyday, the community had many residents, and this store was one of the centers for community activity. I know that Gad also had some very nice farms. It had a sawmill, a church, and it had its very own school. I remember as a child visiting Gad during the 1950s. In fact, my uncle, which was Ephraim Roberts Sr., and his wife, which was my mom's sister, Dorothy Mullins Roberts, lived in Gad for many years, and in fact, they raised their large family of 12 children there in Gad. I also know Fred Mccutcheon, who actually taught in the Gad School and the Belmont School, and in fact all around Nicholas County, and he taught for more than 44 years, also lived there in Gad. His daughter is my very good friend, Charlotte Mccutcheon Goodson. They shared the names of some other families who lived there around Gad. Some of those were Snyder and Alice Odell, Ossie and Mike Maloney. Louis Harlow lived there in Gad, and Ray and Amy Legg. Liza and Tom Mccutcheon, Bertha and Buck Harlow, Lillian and Guy Legg, Betty and Doc Odell, Floyd Mccutcheon, Charlotte and Arthur Mccutcheon, Rat Mccutcheon, Claire and Guy Bales, Cora Brown, Emerson Hart, Ed Hart, Everett and Nana Dooley lived there in Gad. Dennis Foster, Okie Foster, Andy Foster, Luther Foran, Cecil Dorsey, and Mamie Fitzwater all lived there in the Gad community, and I'm sure there are many, many, many more. I know there was a Dotson clan that lived over to where the dam is now. But I do know that most of the Mccutcheon Clan that lived there in Gad descended from an early pioneer, who was known as Jonas Mccutcheon. He actually came to the States from Scotland. He arrived in Fayette County in the early 1800s. John Mccutcheon, one of Jonas's sons, moved over here to Nicholas County in 1851, and he took up residence on a farm in Kessler that he purchased from Mr. Frederick Kessler, who at that time was John's father-in-law, because John had married to Kessler's daughter, Sally. Frederick Kessler and John R. Vaughn operated a store there in Kessler. The community's name of Kessler was later changed to Kessler's Cross Lanes around 1854 when a post office was established there at the junction, and it was discovered that there was already a community called Kessler somewhere in another part of the state, so they changed the name. John Mccutcheon became a very well-known and highly respected Nicholas County resident. He raised a large family, and at one time he served as a delegate to the first Constitutional Convention of West Virginia. I suppose that was in the mid-1860s. Sometime later, two of John Mccutcheon's brothers, which was Jonas Mccutcheon Jr. and his brother Robert, they followed their older brother over here to Nicholas County, and they settled on a very large tract of farming land that was located on McKees Creek, which is fairly near Gad. Three of the younger Jonas's sons, which were Thomas, Arthur, and Floyd, they also settled there in Gad like their father, and they became very well-known local farmers. I do wonder if there's any more pictures out there of such things as the Gad Store, the Gad Sawmill, the Sparks Store. I know Johnny Benz, I think, owned that at one time. The Gad School. I wonder if there's any scenes of the Gad School or other scenes around Gad. If there are, I hope somebody will hear this and share them with me, and maybe we'll look at them. I do know that the Gad's a huge part of the history of Summersville and Nicholas County.